Ready. Three, two, and one. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to Red Thoughts with Perry Picasso. I'm your host, Perry Picasso, and today I am joined by a very lovely guest.
Cam Santana.
Woo! So Cam is an incredible artist, and they are also showcasing right now at the Desde Los Cielos group show, currently exhibiting at the Cheech up until March 16. Go check it out, and they have a piece in there titled.
The Good Lord.
So yeah, we're gonna be talking about the good Lord today.
Mm-hmm.
It
Amen.
is Sunday, the day
Oh
of the
yeah.
Lord. Um, but yeah, before we sort of dive deep into that, I would love to get to know more about you as an
Yes.
artist, you as a person. Tell me a little bit more about you.
Um. Oh my God, that's a loaded question. Um. I think I'm gonna talk about like my journey as an artist
Yeah,
first. Or just a little bit about me. Was born in the IE, Inland Empire here. Um.
represent.
Born in
Woo.
Upland. I was raised in Fontana. Um. I think for me, my journey as an artist, it wasn't a very kind of like typical one because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I've been making art since I was like a little kid, since I was like five, six.
Right.
For me, I didn't realize like I could be an artist until like I was 18 years old.
Okay.
I didn't make my first artwork actually until I was like 18.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't grow up drawing, painting, none of that.
Okay.
Um,
Were you creative sort of in other ways? Like,
Not really.
no.
I wasn't like a really creative kid growing up. Like
Were you
I
like sciencey
I
or?
was really sciencey. I actually
Okay.
loved maths. Like math
I
was
love math. Calculus.
calculus. I
Yeah.
loved taking AP calculus in high school. That shit was so fun. Can I curse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That was so fun taking that class.
I love calculus. Okay.
Um but
S-
yeah, for me like I didn't like I don't know. I think part of the reason why I didn't like discover art was like I didn't grow up really in that kind of environment where
mm,
my family wasn't like really into art. I didn't have anyone I knew personally who really was into art, so it wasn't something I was able to like really connect to at a younger age with.
okay.
But I honestly thought for the longest I was gonna go into like physics. I was gonna go into like pure mathematics or
Okay.
something like
Einstein
that.
mode.
Yeah, because for me, just numbers just came so easily for me, and yeah, I didn't discover like art until I actually went to San Francisco State University. I went there
Okay.
for a year. Um, I was doing theater at the time.
So then you in high school you
Yeah,
graduate and you
created
go
the
to San
yeah,
SF
SF State, San
SF
Francisco
State
State for
for
theater. Because
okay.
I was doing some like minor productions in high school, and I knew like I did not want to do an office job. I could
Okay.
like not imagine myself working 9 to 5 every single day, and I didn't know an alternative yet for that. And I'm like maybe theater, maybe I would like this.
Did you do theater in high school?
I did. I did like two productions in high school.
Okay, so you were a little bit creative then.
I
Okay, see?
guess I was. But for me, it wasn't like I liked it not for the creativity of it, or I kind of I don't know.
Was it more on like the technical side? Were you like doing like the
Yeah,
lighting or sort of things of that?
yeah.
Okay, I see.
Um, I think though for me, it did provide a good space for me to be in that little bit more of that creative area, and it did provide me some alternatives. And just the idea of performance too has been something I thought been thinking a lot in my
Okay.
artistic practice. So that's something I have been carrying on with. Um, but yeah, I went for theater and like I really realized there like this is not for me.
Oh. You're like, this is still not
This
this
is
is not
like
the
this is
vibe.
not the vibe. Yeah, just
Okay.
nothing wrong with theater kids, but like it just
Oh, the vibe. Okay, I see. I see. Okay.
no, not just the theater kids, but just like the idea of like studying theater and like being around that. It was just like yeah, no,
Okay, just not for me.
not for me. And then I actually there I took my first Latino art history class there, or
Okay.
just my first art history class in general, and it was Latino art history, and it was framed from a contemporary and modern perspective, and like
Okay.
that course like absolutely changed my life about art. Like for me, I just always thought like art was just like oh a painting or a
Hmm.
drawing, and like seeing all these different contemporary artists do performances and like these more conceptual works I'm trying to remember a few artist names. I'm blanking on the names right now,
Was there
but
a piece that stood out to you?
well, I don't remember the exact name of the artist, but it was up at the Tate in the early 2000s where she's a Cuban artist. She did a performance where she hired three police officers or people dressed in police uniforms on horses in the Tate Modern lobby space just to guide the people in the lobby space on
Oh
the
shit.
horses. So like it was like a work about like control, about like using
Yeah.
the colonial symbol of a horse and all these different like layered things, and just seeing that work and kind of seeing how art could exist as so much more than just like a painting or a
Hmm.
drawing really was just so inspiring. And um I honestly wasn't doing good in school during that time too. I was skipping probably 80% of the classes
Oop,
I
sorry.
was taking. I was not a good student, and I would just actually go to SF MoMA a lot.
Real.
San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Just I would go
Shout
there
out
like
SF MoMA. It's a beautiful.
be so beautiful. Seven
Yeah.
stories. I would go there like once a week because I was 17 at the time too.
Mm,
So I got free admission there. So I was taking advantage of that. And um yeah, I took a photo class after that, and I really loved it. But then the pandemic happened actually.
okay.
Then that with my grades not being good and me not knowing fully what I wanted to do in my academic, I just decided this isn't for me.
Hmm.
So
And you
yeah.
came back out here to the
Mm-hmm.
IE.
I came back here to Fontana. Took a year off from school, and then I actually was gonna go back to school for art history.
Okay.
Back, I think this is now in 2022, I believe.
Okay.
And um,
Was it going to be also back out in SF or what?
no, I
Okay.
was actually going to Chaffey College at the time
Okay.
too. Which is a community out in Rancho Cucamonga. Honestly, to one of the most like I think beautiful community colleges. Have you ever been to that campus?
No. I need to go.
It's like literally right on the mountains. It's like you get such a beautiful view of Rancho. It's the oldest community college too in California.
Oh wow. That's
Um,
cool.
but
Okay.
yeah, I was going there for art history, and then I took a sculpture class there, and it really just changed everything about my perception of art. And then,
Hmm.
yeah, I decided this is for me now.
Okay. Slay. So you got there and you're like, you know what? Sculpture, that's where you sort of found your, I don't know, your home or sort of
Yeah,
enjoying that more.
yeah, but it wasn't like I wouldn't say like my path isn't like linear because it kind of was linear, but it wasn't like it's not something I knew I was gonna be an artist when I was a kid. It's not
Hmm.
something like, oh, this is my passion from day one. It's was definitely something like I discovered in my later teens, early adult life. And I think because of that, I had to do so much more catching up compared to other people.
Hmm.
Because I had no foundational skills as an artist until like I was like I didn't start like drawing or painting until I was about 20 years old, or like making stuff like
Hmm.
seriously until like I was in my early 20s. So like taking that time to like really catch up was a lot of work, but I think for me it was yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a very, as I've been interviewing more and more folks, like that is kind of a very common thing for a lot of the artists, especially in this show, is that they did sort of do one thing and then like suddenly change last minute and be like, actually, no, this is the vibe.
I know Jesse was
Hmm.
has a very
Jesse. Hmm.
similar experiences. I was actually talking about talking about that to her during the opening, where or the last couple times I met her, how she, I believe, Cal State
Fullerton.
Fullerton,
Hmm.
and she was going for not psychology or
Yeah, it was
psychology.
psychology.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I was right. But yeah, I love talking to her and talking
Hmm.
about her.
And she took like a 10-year gap
Yeah,
from like doing anything about work to suddenly doing it. So it's very common. And I think, I don't know, I think there's also something about when somebody sort of discovers art a little bit later in life, when they sort of have a little bit of a better understanding, maybe not a better understanding, but just like know themselves a little more and are a little more mature, like they're able to sort of take these courses a little bit perhaps more seriously.
definitely.
Because I feel like, I correct me if I'm wrong, but like now that you are sort of like you said, like doing all of these things at like a much more mature age, you're much more like serious about it as opposed to like, when I or somebody else is like 17 taking these classes, they're just like, oh, this is like a whatever class. But to you,
Yeah,
you're like, no, this is, more serious.
definitely. I think too. I'm really glad because right now I don't know if I said this. I'm going to UCLA for art. Shout out to UCLA.
Woo!
Perry is also a
Bruins.
Bruin as well, or was a
Ew.
former Bruin.
Ew.
Wait, I don't
I
remember.
don't know. I just know it's like
UCLA,
UCLA,
you
fight, fight,
fight, fight.
fight. Something.
Yeah,
Bruins.
but yeah, actually just started there too a couple of months ago, so it's been an exciting
Yeah.
journey there. But yeah, I think going from the community college to background, it really allowed me to like take my stuff seriously, but without having the pressure of like, because it's a very different environment when you're around
Yes.
all these different artists. But at community college, it's like not a lot of people are like have a
There's
more
different
serious, yeah,
backgrounds.
but different backgrounds. Not
Hmm.
everyone there is an artist, and like having that pressure, like, oh, I don't have to like, be good
Yeah.
24/7 was like such a relieving because like at UCLA, I know a lot of people are like very
They're
very
locked in.
locked in. So
Yeah.
um yeah,
It's a very intense program. At
it
least
is.
I found it to be a pretty intense, and I'm like, how was that transition going from community to UCLA? Like, I think that's yeah, just
I,
like very different pressures.
Yeah, I think for me, I was scared at first because I'm like, oh my God, this is like the number one public university for art to go to.
Right.
And I'm like, am I gonna, because they have like only like a 4 to 5% acceptance rate too to the art program.
Oh yeah, it's like even smaller than the regular acceptance. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, am
Yeah.
I gonna, am I good enough for this? I kept on having those thoughts, but like once I got there and I saw other people's work, I realized like, okay, this I'm at the right
Okay,
level.
this is where you belong.
Yeah, where I
Okay.
belong. I think especially too as like as a transfer student and seeing other transfer students work, you could see. I'm not saying that other people's works are immature, but you could see like definitely where life came into play
Mm-hmm.
and it allowed them. I don't know.
Like shortcomings, you mean, or
Yeah.
like okay, no, for sure.
But yeah, it's been I think a really wonderful time so far at UCLA. It's barely my first quarter there, so yeah.
Exciting.
Did you enjoy your time at UCLA?
I I will say I think the campus is beautiful. The campus is
It
lovely.
is.
I loved crying in the sculpture garden and going to the top floor of the Bro, the eighth floor at the middle of the night and screaming the top of my lungs.
Bro.
I'm not even kidding. I have dozens of videos. I would literally get drunk and go up there and cry and scream. It's a lovely place. Lots of pain in there, but it's
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah, I agree. It's I think I'm not saying there's a problem with like academics and arts, but there's always a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How it's interesting that you were saying that you sort of um that you almost did you I guess what I'm trying to ask is did you ever have any what's that called? Imposter syndrome?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Literally on one of my first weeks there, I was almost cried in my painting studio because like I was just like I was so overwhelmed with like
Yeah.
being in this
I'm
new
sorry.
environment and like seeing other, especially because I'm not a painter. Like I don't ever paint, so like I took an advanced painting course my first
Oh, you jumped straight into advanced.
jumped straight into
Oh my
advanced
God.
painting. So
Okay.
like seeing everyone there who like at UCLA too, part of the program is that you could redo classes multiple times there. So
Yeah.
like I would say half the class has redone that painting class
Mm,
4 3 times.
yeah.
So like people had more developed like
Right.
sensibilities in painting, and I was there, and I'm like, I haven't touched a paintbrush like in about 2 years.
Right.
So I almost like just like had a breakdown moment because I was seeing everyone else make work, and I'm like, I don't know what to paint, and it was just kind of like such a moment where I'm like, is this right for me? And then the professor saw that and he gave me a talk. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's good.
it was good. That the first couple of weeks were very much an adjustment of like, oh my God, is this right for me? Am I good
Hmm.
enough for here? And then I think now that I'm finished with my first couple months, I feel right at home
Okay,
now.
good. Because I'm like, I think you absolutely do deserve to be there. I'm like, you're at that caliber, if not higher. But I'm like, it is very hard. Like,
Yeah.
I will say I developed a panic attack disorder while I was there, and I have never had panic attacks to that degree before, to the point where I would literally My parents had to drive from here out there every day for class because I could not be
My
there.
God.
Like I would be in class and I'd have to like run out because I was having a panic attack, and I had to like leave school for like a month or so because I was like, yeah, that's a very intense and it is very scary. So I'm glad to hear that you're at least now like recognizing that.
Yeah, it's an adjustment. I don't know, especially to the 10-week classes.
It's very quick,
Very quickly, like
very
once you
quick.
start getting comfortable, it's the class is already over. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to like be in that mindset the whole time there of like go 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 because it's just everything's happening.
Hmm. How have you? Do you feel like? Are you right now just sort of like trying to get the ropes of everything, or you sort of feel like you're comfortable enough now to start exploring sort of different topics or themes or things that sort of interest you?
Actually, I've actually been kind of take painting has really made me take a like a 180 with my practice.
Okay,
Um,
explain.
because my I was saying earlier my math was my background
Yes.
and I actually a lot of my sculpting practice is really inspired by math and kind of like
Mm,
geometry and
uh,
very kind of precise fabricated things.
okay.
A lot of my practice revolves around just being really technical with things, and painting is like one of those mediums where it's a lot harder to be
It's the exact opposite. Yeah,
opposite.
it's
So
intuition.
yeah, so taking that like really 180 of like having a practice that's been really precise and trying to like do painting with that, I kind of had to drop that because I'm like it became too difficult for me
Yeah.
to become so precise and so technical with everything. Um, and I, I do make a lot of work about my queer identity, but I feel like I don't really address that much about my like Chicano identity. So
Hmm.
I've been really kind of focused on that in my
Okay.
painting practice. My mother actually keeps a very large archive of images dating back all the way from like the 1920s
Oh wow. Of.
of a family portraits, and like she keeps them in shoe boxes, and it's just this very kind of like
Hmm.
over I think 1,000 photos she has
That's crazy.
stored up. So I've actually been working with that as like a personal archive
Okay.
with painting those photographs. And a lot of these are like very kind of like chola photos of like my mom with like those in back in the 90s with like the eyebrows, or like my grandma with like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
big old 50s hair and kind of like all of that. So it's interesting to see kind of just generational wise how, because I think my experience too as a Chicano is it's different from other people's because my family has been here for like I think 3, 4 generations already.
Okay.
So just seeing those photos too, like in the photos, like slowly become more and more Americanized too. It was
Hmm.
an interesting kind of, but also having that a lot of that the identity still
Present.
present in the
Hmm.
photographs. It's really interesting. I could like send you some
Please,
pictures
if you
to.
do, we can put
uh,
them up here, whichever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. But that's something I've been like really addressing in my work recently. Um,
Okay.
so it's been a really kind of interesting turn in my artistic practice.
Do you think that because it's painting, it's allowed you to sort of be a little bit more in that personal realm that you've been able to enter as opposed to sort of the more sculptural, three-dimensional, like very rigid?
Yeah, I feel like I've been able to play around in my work, and I feel like play hasn't been present in my sculpture
Okay.
practice because sculpting it. I think for me, the way I approach it's a very kind of technical. Like I have to have the precise materials. Like I have to, and especially too, it's a lot more of an investment. I feel
Yeah.
like than painting. So because I've been painting just on paper, so I'm like I just could get a couple tubs of paint
Hmm.
paper and just knock out a few paintings, but like sculpting I have to buy plaster wrap, silicone,
Hmm.
all these different things to make something. So
Yeah, and also with plaster, I know that with it's one of those that like if you don't mix it quite right, it can fuck up, and
yeah.
people will know you fucked up.
Yeah.
Especially in the sort of the manner I think of like the way you do like any sort of imperfections are sort of like amplified.
Yeah.
As opposed to painting, it's a little more forgiving.
Yeah. So um just yeah, I feel like just painting has brought me so much more play in my work, and it's
Okay.
allowed me to really kind of just experiment more and more and more. So I have been enjoying that, but it just for me, I'm still trying to figure out like where it kind of lands in my artistic practice because it's very different from the things I've been making. So I think my painting practice is something I'm probably gonna keep private.
Okay.
for the next couple years as I kind
I
of
love that.
get good at it and kind of not get good at it, but just to really
Like get comfortable.
get comfortable and figure out what painting is for me.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. I personally, I do believe in sort of the idea of like not everything is meant for the world.
Yeah.
Like some things are just for you, for those close to you, if they feel comfortable enough to share.
I think honestly, as artists, I think we all need to have something we keep personal to ourselves. I feel like a lot of times, I'm not saying it's not bad to like put everything out online or everything in the world, but I think it's good just to have a practice for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
whether that practice be writing, or that practice be like a drawing or sculpting, just having something for yourself to
Yeah.
really experiment with and play with. I think it's something that it's wonderful, something that
Mm-hmm.
helps so much out.
100%. I do believe that. Yeah. There's just like something about having something just for you, something that like also like you don't have to worry about what others will
Hmm.
perceive, how others will take it. Like you don't care. It's literally just whatever you want.
Yeah.
And it can be as horribly like done as it can. Like I used to have this crap journal, which it was literally like I would just try to make as ugly of a drawing as I can, and not worry. And that's for me.
Yeah. I know. I think for me, it's gonna be painting. Actually, too, I do write a lot of poetry as well, so I usually try to keep my poetry practice more to me. I'm actually right now too trying to get a minor in creative writing at
Okay.
UCLA, so that's been interesting as well.
Okay, that's sweet.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that. So you're gonna be doing art and minoring in
yeah,
creative writing. You're going really at it. You're going. You're
yeah.
like I'm get my money's worth.
I am. But honestly, it's hard when you're working, especially doing your art practice and doing other academic stuff. It's like it's really hard to like be like, oh, I want to do this and that when you just have to worry about like, 'cause especially too like I'm not saying like about any. I think this goes for any art program in general. There's a lot of people who come from more affluent backgrounds,
Yeah.
and they have the kind of luxury to just do their artistic background and they're able
Mm-hmm.
to do more other things. But I think for people who come from more like working class backgrounds like me, where my parents are not paying a dime for my education, um, it's I don't have that luxury to be like doing so many different things compared to
Yeah.
other people. So, um, yeah, I think that's something that's not really talked a lot about in our education. I think especially too with like public or private schools, like paying like 80, 90,000 a year for tuition is like
Crazy.
insane.
Yeah. I know it really is super expensive. I was fortunate enough to get like the what is it, the blue and gold,
Yeah.
yeah, and the scholarship or grant, whatever. So it was all just sort of tuition was paid for and most of housing was paid for. So I just had to sort of focus more on like similar with you, just like supplies and sort
Yeah.
of anything personal.
Yeah.
But it's still just like a lot, especially some of the things they ask you to do. I'm like, you guys want me to do all of this?
Like make stretch 9 8 by 10 canvases.
Right.
I'm like with what money? Like
Right. And they're like, and bring that in next Tuesday.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember I almost wanted to cry because like during one of my painting classes, she gave us like a whole list of paints to buy and different materials, and I was like, oh, it's kind of like you know how like in elementary school they'd say like get all of these things, but it's like you don't really need 7 highlighters.
Yeah.
But like I get then she's like, all right, everyone, pull out your number 2 filbert and your and your number 3 round, and we're gonna be making brushes. We're gonna be making marks with just those two today. And I was like, oh, you were serious.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I was like the only one without it, and I was like, oh, okay. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really rough out
It
there.
is.
But I'm glad that I don't know. I'm happy to hear that you're at least like still pushing through
Yeah.
and like
I think too just finding a way to make art without like spending as little as possible has been something that's been interesting
okay.
recently. Yeah.
What other sort of are you excited to take any other sort of exploring any different mediums while you're there?
I think performance too is
Okay.
something I'm excited to do because I do photography as well.
Okay.
A lot of my photographic process revolves around self portraiture. So I feel like I have an element of performance into my practice already, and it's performing for the camera.
Mm-hmm.
But doing like live performances versus performing for the camera, it's these
Right.
very different things. So I'm really interested to see how like I could relate those things together, or how they kind of exist in different but both the same spaces.
Right.
That's something I'm really interested in exploring with my artistic practice, and I think also too, just for my own sculpting practice, metalworking. I'm so excited for that.
Ooh. Ooh, the welding.
Welding, yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
just learned how to weld a couple weeks ago, so I haven't like really made anything with it yet, but I'm planning a few works with welding soon. So I'm
Exciting.
quite excited to get into the welding. It's quite scary though, like
Yeah.
wearing that big old mask and like I don't know, just hearing the zzz,
It's really cool though. I love welding.
yeah.
Okay. So it seems like there's sort of I'm like hearing sort of different traces in which the math part of you is still coming in.
Yeah.
Like welding is not something that I mean, I guess you can do it intuitively, but it's like you have to do a lot of measuring. You have to do a lot of,
Yeah.
engineering if you want the sculpture to stand still.
Yeah. I don't know. I think for me it's just like I feel like math just leaks into
Yeah.
everything. Like no matter what subject, I think there's math in it. Like English, I think there's like the way kind of sentences form and how beats kind of form in a sentence. There's like some math behind that. Music, there's
Hmm.
math behind that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Um so I'm just like I think yeah, just really interested to see how like I could get that kind of fabricated like almost like mathematical spin I could do for a lot of other mediums, and I've been trying to do that with painting, but it just didn't work out. But I'm excited to see how I could do that with other
Okay.
mediums too.
I'm curious, like, how has, like, what is it about math that you find just so, like, amusing?
Um, I think it's just the way that math could be used to kind of really systematize, is that a right word? Or
Okay.
kind of like how math could be used as a tool to like really break down every single element in the world. Like
Okay.
I feel like if you know enough variables, almost anything could be put into a math equation.
Okay.
So like
Mm-hmm.
just knowing that and knowing how there's like literally math being put into everything, like the way like this microphone is in my hand, like how much tension is in between my fingers right now, and how much force is being pulled up for the gravity
Okay.
not to push it down. It's like everything could be put into a number if you know enough things. So like just knowing that idea and just like seeing everything in the world, seeing like oh like how a bend in a tree is could be
Like a
put in
mathematical curve or something.
yeah, it's so beautiful, like knowing
Hmm.
that, and I I I I unknowingly and knowingly at the same time have that kind of very systematic way of approaching my artwork. I think you could see it a lot in my work at the
Hmm.
Cheech right now. But I just think it's so fascinating how like literally everything there's math in everything. We just can't
Okay.
avoid it.
Do you like sort of the fact that math can be used to, like, explain some things, or that it can be almost as like a, when there's sort of chaos, like you can, there's sort of like some rules in which the world operates in? Is that sort of, or is it just,
I think partly it's actually a hard question because I don't know. It's just for me. Yeah, it just math could be so many different things, and it could
okay.
be a system and way we kind of categorize everything, but it also could be other things. Yeah, and for me, just growing up too, just numbers came so much more easily for
Okay.
me. So partly because of that too, it just I think more numbers. I don't know. It's just a lot of different things why math really kind of appeals to me.
Okay. Because I love math too. That's why I'm like trying to see like the different angles of it. Um, and I don't know why, but like as you were talking about math being in everything, it also kind of reminded me a lot about sort of the idea of like God being in everything,
Hmm.
and like seeing that sort of parallels also within your work, and a lot of your work is a lot of very sort of like tying into that religiousness. Don't know if you want to get into that as
Yeah.
well.
You know what? It's quite crazy because when I like personally when I make work, I'm thinking about so many different things at once where it's so hard for me to be like, my artwork is about this, my
Right.
artwork is about that. But I actually really didn't even see that connection in my work. Like the oh God being in everything and math being in everything. Like
Oh,
I did not even
really?
like
Oh, okay.
make that connection yet. But that's like such a
A good connect.
good
Okay,
connection for
because
me.
yeah, like that's what I when you were talking about math being in everything, it just reminds me of the idea of like people saying like, well, that's why they love God because God they see Him in everything, and sort of like I know that some people that's why they like science and stuff like that, because it sort of connects everything together.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I think part of the work was to kind of like, how do I live with this very scientific thinking I have now, then how do I live with this very kind of religious Catholic upbringing I had? So I think part of the work is that kind of clash between those two. But
Hmm.
I think I kind of like the way you view it more as it kind of like math beating everything and God beating everything, that kind of
Hmm.
joining rather than that clashing. I think
Yeah.
that is a little bit more of a beautiful thing to think about. But for
Yeah.
me, I personally was thinking more about that kind of clash, like the clash between those two.
Oh, because like people sort of see them as like opposites.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um yeah, and there, and not even for me personally, it's hard to have that kind of coexistence with this more spirituality and that more scientific thinking. And they definitely could coexist, but for me, I haven't found personally how they coexist yet. So I think I definitely need to do more soul searching or more thinking about, for me personally, how they exist. But for me, I think it's more that kind of internal battle of like really figuring out like, where do these belong in my own
Hmm.
identity, has been something I've been thinking about.
Okay. 'Cause, yeah, I can see that sort of in a lot of the different works, because I think one of the first works I think you did was, I think it was like the confession stamp, but it was like a glory hole,
Oh yeah, so
right? Tell
yeah,
me, I'm like,
that
please,
one,
how did that come about?
Glory. The work is called Glory.
Okay.
What it is, it's a I remade a bathroom door to scale, and I
Out of
cast
out of
out
plaster.
of wood actually,
Okay.
and then I casted the my friend Zen, wonderful artists too. They helped me with so many different projects, but I casted their knees and their feet, and then I put them on the opposite side, so you just could see the traces of their knees and the traces of their feet. So it could look like a confessional, but since there's a glory hole right in the middle, it kind of denotes something else in it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that I it's so funny because like I don't even think about like the religious aspects of my work until like
Really?
now. But yeah, I
A
get,
little Catholic boy trauma. It's
yeah,
okay.
it's just like, the Catholicism is just built so deep in my head. It's like I don't even fully comprehend it at this point. But I was really interested just in the word glory hole, because it's just like the word glory. It just like it has such a deep meaning to it, and just like what does like glory exactly mean? And I don't know. It's just that rendering that kind of white plaster too was something that really interested me, because I don't know. Have you ever seen? Did you ever see that work in person? I had it up at the little gallery for a little bit.
I did not.
Um,
I've only seen photos, unfortunately.
but that the work is, I made it with this material called body double, which is like a silicone. They used it for movie making stuff, so
Okay.
I was able to get like really precise like wrinkles on all the
Oh,
skin.
okay.
Um, I could send you a detail shot too for the
Please
podcast when we
send me
show it.
pictures.
But yeah, that I'm trying to think what I haven't really wrote about that work or thought about that work in a minute, so I don't have that much to.
No, I mean that's already enough to like hear about, because like that's, I think that was the first work that you showed me when I
Yeah,
first, like the first time I met you, and like I remember that sticking with me, because I was like, that's such a like visually simple, like it's just like the knees and the feet and then the door, but it's like put together so like beautifully, and so like there was such a strong story to it.
yeah. I think for me, how I kind of approach art, I think for me, it is a very formal thing, where I kind of think, I always think of form before I think of concept,
Okay.
which is it is weird having like, not weird, but sometimes it does lend its problems. But I for me, I kind of had a dream actually where I saw this sculpture in my head, and I'm like,
Okay. And you're like, I need to do
I need to
this.
do this, and like I wasn't going in it with like, oh, this is about this. But for me, I was really just interested in the form of that kind of negative space of bodies, of like how representing bodies with just so much negative space.
Mm.
And I think the idea of negative space is also, I think, something that is present in the work in
The Cheech.
Cheech the Good Lord, where the negative space between the body parts, where
Hmm.
they kind of break apart. Um, but
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, I always think about form before I think about concept, and it's sometimes I do have a concept before a form, but I think for me, it's always like I have this kind of very vivid image of something, and I'm like, how like I have to sit with it for a while before a meaning could really,
Like emerge from it.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, if anything, I think that kind of comes back to the idea of like maybe you are like that is your intuition, and
Mm-hmm.
then later on when you break it down, then you find the meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I've been saying my process is a very technical process, I do leave a lot of things for chance.
Okay.
Like the work I have about the Cheech, the good Lord, that the color was kind of a chance thing.
Oh. Okay.
Because it's 3D printed, so when I was printing the work, I was like, oh, I like this orange filament, and I chose to print it in orange for the first couple test times, and
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I really love this orange color, so I'm like,
I'm gonna stick with it.
stick with it. And
Okay.
the name too, the good Lord, comes from the file name I was using for the work, where I had a couple test ones. I'm like, oh, this is a bad one, and this is a good one.
Oh,
So I'm like,
interesting.
oh, I
The
like that
good
name, the
Lord.
good Lord. So, but I also just like that as a kind of way, as a form of expression, like good Lord, like
Yeah.
how it could be
Oh, good
used as,
Lord.
yeah, could be used as a good thing, and also I don't know. It was such an interesting name for me.
Okay. Well, speaking of the good Lord, we can dive deeper into that one.
Yes.
So, the good Lord is a piece that Cam currently has right now at the Cheech. It is a 3D printed sculpture of Jesus in wrapping himself around a cube.
Yes.
And the description goes: the good Lord systematically divides the crucifixion into 6 equal parts and folds the scene into a cube. The artist's aesthetics and materials are inspired deeply by the minimalist artists of the 1960s and 70s like Donald Judd, Robert Morris, and Sol Lewitt. Along with historical artistic representations of the crucifixion, the tension of the good Lord is located both in smooth negative space between each fragmented body part, reminiscent the way the body is articulated in positions of BDSM or in torture, and the materiality of the manufactured plastics and the naturally occurring wood. 3D model made with the assistance of Zen
Yes, Zen.
at
Il-
AELYAS 999.
Ilias 999.
Yes.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so that's something I didn't talk about a lot in my earlier, but I'm really interested in art history in my work.
Okay.
I actually got an associate degree in art history at Chafee, and it's
Okay.
something I do plan on pursuing in the future. I don't know to what extent,
Mm-hmm.
but I think as an artist, I don't know where I heard this from, but um, I've been told this multiple times where you could either willfully borrow or ignorantly borrow in art.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I wholeheartedly believe in willfully borrowing in
Mm-hmm.
art. So I'm really interested too in just the whole kind of minimalist movement in the 70s and
Okay.
60s, and like the sculptures being made then of how kind of just like these forms of cubes and squares existed in the gallery. But for me, there's always been a problem with it, with the kind of representation of the artists there. Like the 3 artists I mentioned were just all white men artists,
Right.
unfortunately. So
Straight white men.
straight white men. So it has been hard to kind of use these works in that kind of lens. So like I love kind of adding this kind of queer lens to that kind of viewing of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And their minimalism as a movement started as a way to make performances. Like these sculptures existed as kind of props for choreography at first.
Oh, I did not know this.
So, kind of using that history as a way to kind of have these more minimal forms to be a way to kind of view a body is something I was interested in the work too.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like harken back to that history, but also thinking about more historical representations of the Jesus Christ. Like there's a painting by I'm forgetting his name. I think Velasquez.
Okay.
It's a crucifixion, but it's the composition of the work is like his hands are at the ends of each painting, and
Uh-huh.
his feet is at the end of the or just above the end of the painting. So like
Uh-huh.
the whole crucifixion scene is like almost like a T on
Uh-huh.
the canvas, and it was done in the 1600s. And thinking about how that work was composed end to end, and kind of the whole body was just the work itself, rather than like when we look at historic representations of the crucifix, it's like you get it on the hill, you have all that scenery, but like
Mm-hmm.
just showing that kind of moment was kind of something that really interested me in my work.
Interesting.
And also too, just more contemporary examples like Andrew Serrano's Piss Christ. This is a work I was
Oh, I love that one.
the work
Yes.
where the for those who don't know, it's the artist believe in the early 90s, late 80s took a photo of Jesus Christ in piss. So like it was rendered as this very kind of holy, kind of like glowing image of like radiating yellow.
Hmm.
But it was like a picture of like Jesus Christ. It was just such a intense work and like
Caused quite the uproar too, if I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
So yeah, just seeing those examples have been really influential in my artistic practice and like just not even just in this sculpture, but just for my own practice in general. Um, and so, something I'm also interested to in my work is material. I think
Hmm.
material is such an important thing for me in my practice. I think this materials of resin and plastic and these very kind of manufactured materials and
Hmm.
it's rendering something that we don't really see, like the crucifixion and these kind of really artificial plastics. I think for me kind of goes back to that clash I was talking about between the scientific and this kind of spiritual thinking, this kind
Hmm.
of, it brings back to like this, the material of resin and plastic is this kind of scientific
It's a
material,
man-made object.
man-made object versus wood, which is the backing of the crucifix is
Hmm.
made from wood. So it kind of, for me, again, it kind of speaks more to that kind of clash between these two things.
Hmm.
And kind of like representing this clash through material has been such an important kind of way in thinking of this work.
It's interesting that you're also saying about that because, like, when I think also a lot about a lot of modern day crucifixions or sort of like religious imagery is like they are like made out of like little plastic
Yeah.
things, but they'll sort of paint over or try to find a way to sort of like make you forget that it is plastic. But because yours is like this vibrant,
Yeah.
like almost like a traffic cone
Yeah.
orange,
Actually, the specific color is safety orange.
safety orange.
Safety
Okay, that
orange.
makes, yeah, safety orange. Like it's meant to be so visible that you can't ignore the fact that it is. And then I think about like the Charlie XCX song "Jesus Christ on a Plastic Sign." Like I don't know, something about the idea of like you almost like not exposing, but just sort of like showing it sort of for what it is. Like it's
Yeah.
Jesus Christ out of plastic, and
Yeah.
like it's, I don't know. I was thinking about that and sort of the idea that it's like it's plastic, but like you almost like gave yourself the authority to like deconstruct Jesus, and
Yeah.
I think that's how. Yeah, how was that?
It took me so the work. It took me almost 2 years to make this work. Actually,
Okay, so this is 2 years in the making
2 years
then.
in the making. Yeah,
Okay.
I started this work in February in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And this was way before the show
Right.
was even conceptualized. I was working on this for myself. Actually, this work.
Okay.
I was taking a design course, and actually part of the design course is that we had to unfold boxes,
Okay.
and we had to just make these paper packaging boxes. And to make a simple cube, it actually has to have the shape of a crucifix because
It's a
um,
T.
it's a T. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm like, when I was looking at it, I'm like, my little traumatized Catholic brain was like, this kind of looks like
This
a
looks
yeah,
familiar.
crucifix. So actually,
Uh-huh.
the 2 days later, I actually bought one of those cheap small crucifixes, and I took it to the miter saw, and I actually
Oh.
chopped that up, and that was the first maquette I made of it.
Oh my, do you have
Uh,
pic? Are you gonna have to send me
I could
pictures?
definitely send you
Okay.
pictures to use during this, but yeah, I did that one, and I'm like, oh my god, this work could be something. And then I actually sat on that work, not like I literally sat on
Right.
it, but like I
Put it in the back of your
put
mind.
it in the back of my head for like the next like 3-ish months, and then I was just trying to figure out a way to make it because I wanted to make it big, but I'm like, how the hell do I make this work
Right.
big in the way I want it to? And um for me, I kind of realized 3D printing was probably the best way I could make this work big,
Mm-hmm.
and I could have built it from hand like the model, but I'm like, the point is for me not to build the model. The point for me was to like have the representation of Christ. So I'm like, I want this to be like exact and as
Mm-hmm.
clean as possible. So I went that route, and I actually built two different maquettes before I came to the final one too. One of them was about like, I would say, this scale,
Okay, a little smaller.
a little smaller, and that was for me just figuring out like material choices of like how the 3D print is gonna go to the wood and
Mm-hmm.
kind of figuring out that, and then I made one to scale fully,
Mm-hmm.
and that one was just 3D printed, not just no wood in the work, and I was gonna go with that one at first, but I just didn't like how it looked that
Okay.
much, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna rebuild this whole thing again, and then
You
rebuilt
came
it.
this to
Yeah.
this one. Okay.
So that the one at the Cheech, I started making that one at the beginning of January, and then I didn't finish it until November.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
because the 3D printing it took a while.
It's a pretty large piece, and then you also sanded it.
Yeah, so to make each piece, I actually coated it in resin. I sanded, painted it, resin, sand, paint, resin over and over again, to get rid of all the layered lines in the work. That was such a process of doing. Um, Took me so long to make actually, and then the work is such a labor of love. I
Mm-hmm.
have to say that. And then the backing too of the wood didn't take that long, but I did have to um, wood filler, sand, paint, wood filler, sand, paint for that
Mm-hmm.
as well. So it was just a lot of like repetition over and over. And for me, kind of, I felt like the whole thing was almost like a performance
Okay.
because I was like sanding Jesus's feet, and it just felt like kind of almost like just this very kind of performative thing of like. I also think too, in a lot of times, just think the Catholic religion, the idea of like repetition, like
Mm-hmm.
go say 10 Hail Marys
The
after
rituals.
ritual. So like for me, even just the way I approached it was just kind of this very ritualistic thing of, oh, I have to do this over and over and over again. So that's something that I kind of enjoyed. I don't know if it
Okay.
was again my little Catholic traumatized brain, but just the repetition of the work, which is just something that I just found so beautiful in it, the
Yeah,
process.
that's lovely.
Um,
Okay.
yeah,
So you started this, you said, in January, and I think that was around the time probably when Emmanuel
yeah, reached
reached
out.
out. What was your thoughts when, they presented sort of the idea of this? Were you like, I know exactly what this, or were you just like,
So they actually, at the time, they actually saw another work I made that was installed at the Wignall Museum of Art at Chaffey College. I did a
okay.
work called Interaction, which dealt with ideas of quantum physics and queerness.
Oh, wow.
It was a whole room installation where,
Oh, you told me this one. Yes.
yes,
Okay,
yeah,
wait. Sorry, continue.
yeah, it
Uh-huh.
was a whole room installation, and I had two projectors on the opposite side of the room, and I had two walls of beaded curtains and videos of like relating to queerness, to queer identity, to physics, the natural world were kind of overlaid on top of each other. And there was kind of moments in the installation where these videos combined. There was moments where you could see like what was going on the other side of the room because of the
Hmm.
projections, and I could go a lot more into the work, but because it does a lot with science, and I don't want to go too much into the science aspect of it. But yeah, that they saw that work,
Hmm.
and they were like, oh, we need like like this show was related at the time, I think more to like science fiction stuff.
Yes, it was more sci-fi. Hmm.
So they were like, "Oh, do you want to do a smaller version of that?" And I was like, "I do not want to." Because
It was like a full room,
it was a
right?
full
Yeah.
room, and like I knew the lobby space was a very kind of bright lit area, so I'm like,
Yes, I remember
I
this.
cannot do any rendition of the work because of that. So I'm like, I just finished up that work during that period too when they were reaching out, and like I was showing in Manuel that, and they were like, actually, this would work would look good for the show. So I was like, okay. Then I went through the whole process of fabricating it again.
Hmm. Okay. How did when you sort of read the title and everything of like the alienness, like how did that sort of resonate with you, or what sort of aspect of that did you cling on to? Or not cling on to, but just gravitate toward, sorry.
I think for me the way I gravitated most to it was a kind of I think the way queerness and the way kind of religion plays into it, because when I think from the heavens, I think of representations um of the crucifixion of the Virgin Mary, and kind of how that kind of relates both to like the kind of the ideas of aliens, but also kind of how I felt alienated from the religion,
Mm.
especially from the religion that was kind of forced upon me
Hmm.
growing up. And I don't know if you grew up Catholic
I
too.
did. I was an altar server till I was like 16.
Ooh. Ooh.
I did Bible studies for fun like multiple times a week.
Oh my God. You were in the trenches.
When I tell you, I used to pray the rosary like every night.
Oh my God.
Like not just like on Christmas, like no, every night
That's
before bed.
crazy. But I think though, like so many other Latino or like
Yeah,
other
it's a
Latina
common
people,
thing.
it's something that we just grew up with. So it just, especially when you realize you're queer, it's something that's so much at odds with how you kind of operate and think about the world. So that was something I was kind of really thinking about when I was also making this work too. Like I was saying too, and the wall label, the imagery does relate to kind of like this BDSM imagery
Hmm.
and this kind of like almost bodily torture, and kind of also kind of the way that people relate to the crucifix as this kind of like symbol of martyrism. I was also thinking about like what does it mean to queer that kind of symbol of martyrism,
Hmm.
and like what does it mean to like really make it to this kind of like sexual kind of position of martyrism.
It was a little cunty, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
The way you cut it, I was like, she's a little cunty.
Yeah. But yeah, that's something I was really interested too in this, like how to like kind of relate this kind of alienation to both this idea of religion and this kind of queerness in a very kind of succinct gesture. And I thought kind of that was this very kind of
Succinct.
succinct gesture I could relate this to, of like relating this to this very religious image, but also relating this to this very kind of sexual tension in the work.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
I definitely see that. Were you ever sort of, when you sort of are doing something like this, is it ever sort of, I don't know, just like, are you ever just like afraid or just sort of like, what if, because this is such a sacred image. Like, were you at any moment like, oh, what if something, says something like,
I was
how's,
honestly like I even when it's up right now, still for the next 3 months, I'm kind of expecting someone just to knock it down.
okay, that's what I'm like so afraid of. Like, I hope to God nobody does that. But
Honestly,
like,
I would love it if someone knocked it down.
okay,
I would love the
I'm gonna have
fact.
to bleep that
No, no, I would not love it. Do not quote. Do not knock it down, though,
out.
please. But it's just the idea of like someone feeling so kind of emotionally charged. So it's like I do not like this so much. It's just like
Okay.
knowing that someone got that such a visceral reaction to my artwork. I feel like for
Okay.
me, it's such a strong kind of like.
You're on the right path.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
like my artwork was able to have make someone have this such a viral reaction. I'm like, it's
Hmm.
something beautiful about that, of like making something that makes someone has such an intense emotion that they want
Okay.
to do something.
So you're fully just like,
If it
no,
happens,
if it
yeah,
happens out,
if
okay.
it happens, it happens. For
Okay.
me, I think she's too growing up queer. Like you just learn not to like care.
Hold on to things too hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just for
Yeah.
me. I think that's something I definitely
Huh.
carry on in my artistic practice, where I'm just like, I like, my parents know I make my glory holes. Like I literally have the glory holes.
You have multiple of these? I just know of the one.
No, no, I just have this one. Promise, promise. But
Allegedly.
allegedly, my parents, we have the glory hole just sitting in my backyard.
Do they know it's a
Oh
glory
yeah, they
hole?
know it's a glory hole.
Okay.
They've seen my other like kind of like more BDSM inspired work.
Okay.
They fully support my.
Okay. So your parents are. I was gonna ask you about that earlier. Like, how have they been on this
Oh, they love
journey?
it. They
Okay.
don't love it, but like they kind of know I'm doing what I love, and
Okay.
they're
And they're just
really,
happy for you.
yeah, they're happy for me. They know too. I'm not saying like I'm like super successful yet, but they know like I'm having personal success with what I'm doing. Like I'm
Yeah.
having work at museums. I'm going to UCLA for this, so like they know I'm like doing this in a very kind of serious and right manner. So they're like fully supportive of it.
Oh, that's
And
good.
my parents too, it's kind of strange because my parents are not like super Catholic, but they did send me to Catholic school growing up. So they
Okay.
gave me trauma for no reason. Like we're the type of people growing up where we only went to church on Christmas.
Oh, but they sent you to school.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it gave me trauma for no reason.
Thanks.
No.
Like, sorry.
uh,
Love you though.
but no, yeah, my parents like they're fully supportive. I love my parents so much.
Okay.
Yeah, they I wouldn't say my parents are like, "Oh my God, we love your Gloria hole," but they're like saying like they're like they're okay
Like,
with it.
okay. That's good to
Yeah,
hear. That they're at least, I guess, tolerant or just like
yeah,
supportive in as much as they're able to.
yeah,
Okay.
um, yeah,
Very slay. Okay. So now that you have sort of this work at the Cheech, which I'm still just like, I'm also intrigued by the fact that you said that you're like okay with sort of like, you're like, as a queer person, you're like okay if like letting things sort of go? Because I have that sort of idea of like sometimes if a work gets like for me, I love the idea if I sell like if somebody has a painting of mine and they have it in the kitchen and they spill spaghetti on it, that's not part of the work. And it sounds similar to you where you're like if somebody gets so angry and this happens, like that is just part of the work. And it's interesting to hear that you're also like even though you're fully aware of like I don't know, like you're so meticulous and so like technical about everything, but you're like able to just be like, yeah, but if it happens,
Yeah.
like
I
how do you balance that?
Well, I fully believe like once you make something, it's not yours anymore.
Okay.
It's the world's work now. I think
Okay.
it's something more common in writing because I think writing is a little bit more of an accessible thing. Where I
Mm.
know I also studied English as well.
Mm-hmm.
And something we talk a lot about writing is authorial intent of where the intent of the author where a lot of times where once a work of writing is published that it's just not the author's anymore. It's this becomes this kind of how people interpret the meaning.
Oh.
That's where the meaning really matters in the work. So
Mm-hmm.
I fully believe that in any forms of art where it's not really once you make something the
It's
meaning you kind of prescribe to it, the way you kind of interact with it, it doesn't matter as much as the way other people interact with it or what
mm-hmm.
other people's meanings get from it. And I actually just did a sculpture class focusing on public art, and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of really even enforced that more in me of like you can make something really beautiful, you can make something with this purpose, but if people find another way to interpret it and then that becomes a more common way people value it or view it, I think that means more than what you make or means
Hmm.
more with the function of it. So that's something I do believe in any
Okay.
form of art where, yeah, it's not yours anymore. It's the public's.
And you're just like fully just like letting that go.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Um, but yeah, I think too, it is hard sometimes to like, oh, I worked hard on this. And if something does happen to it, I mean, if of course, if someone just like gets a hammer in it, I'm going to
Right.
be sad for a little bit, but
Right.
also I'm like, I worked hard for it. I got my documentation of the work.
Right.
Even if it existed for such a short amount of time, it existed. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's all that kind of matters for me.
That is a good way to think about it. Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think that's important for me.
And moving forward, what are you sort of hoping to continue to explore? Are you hoping to do more of these sort of 3D printed sort of
Definitely.
exploring maybe different iconography, different symbols, or are you exploring like painting, or are you just like I'm just having fun right now because you're like I'm at school?
Yeah, I'm definitely just having fun. Like I said earlier, I've been only making sculpting, like I've been only taking my artistic practice seriously for like 3 years
Okay.
now. So I feel like I'm such in a moment of kind of experimentation and kind of really feeling out of like these different routes and paths I could go into in my artistic practice. And it feels so kind of just like refreshing and so kind of like there's so many different things I could do right now, and I'm kind of loving that of that being overwhelmed with all these materials and mediums and practices. Something though I have been doing is 3D printing because that work was actually my first 3D printed work
Oh
too.
no
So that
way!
was my first time actually 3D printing was with,
Wow.
but doing it for 2 years it makes you like learn a thing or two
Right.
about
Okay.
printing. So I actually have been what I do now is I actually make my sculptures on Blender
Okay.
and then I 3D print them after. So like
Hmm.
right now, I actually have little tiny models of all the sculptures I've been making now.
Oh,
Um,
that's so cute,
because
little.
it is so much more useful than like building it out of cardboard or building it out of another material because you're able to get it very precise and you're able to do it like in an hour or two without
Hmm.
thinking because you're able to just print
Right.
button and have that thing there. So it has been a way for me to save money and a way for me to um make things quickly. It's something I'm gonna experiment more in my work, and I think painting is something I'm gonna really push myself to do because it's something
Okay.
that's uncomfortable for me, and I kind of like existing in that kind of uncomfortability.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm gonna try to find a way of how these kind of different ideas of math, iconography, all queerness, my Chicano identity, trying to make these into a very concise artistic language, and it's gonna be hard, but it's gonna probably take me a whole lifetime to figure that out.
Yeah.
um but Yeah, I'm excited for this journey. I feel like I'm barely starting right now.
For sure. I mean, I'm like, that is definitely going to be like a lifelong mission
Yeah.
that's going to be ever evolving and changing. I'm thinking right now of like, because you just love the idea of 3D printing. Like, if there's a way that you can do sort of like, you know how they do the 3D printing, but they have the 3D printer, instead of it doing a filament, it's like writing or it's like making
I've seen it
marks or
with clay
something.
too.
Or with clay, yes, I've seen that as well. I know that UCLA has CNC,
Mm-hmm.
so you can
I
also.
actually did use a CNC
Oh, you
machine.
did use it already?
Yeah,
Okay.
I love. I just any way I could fabricate, any way I could like do less work, I will take that. No, not do less work, but it's just for me like I just don't like the artist hand in a lot of my work. I love it like
Oh,
really
interesting.
like I know something I've been that's why I've been battling with painting because I'm like I don't like you could that's why like I spent 2 years on that work because like I was trying to make it in a way where it just looked like something that existed before.
Uh-huh.
Like it didn't look like something that was handmade. It looked like, you know,
Like it just kind of like fell from the
yeah.
heavens. Interesting. So you don't like sort of having the like imperfections or like the little things.
No.
Really
Yeah.
interesting.
That's why it's been such a battle for me with painting because I'm like just like a brushstroke is off. I'm like fuck.
Yeah, it's
It's
you can see every little thing.
every single little
Hmm.
thing. So, yeah, I think some, I think honestly too, just me being okay with that, I think is also another thing, part of my artistic journey, of things making, because it is fun to make things look as perfect as it possibly can, but also I'm like, it takes so long, and I I. When I think of artists who could make perfect things like Jeff Koons or like
Hmm.
Charles Ray, all these kind of more historic sculptors, they have a team of like 20 people working for them.
Right.
And I'm like,
And
I'm
a
just by
budget
myself.
of a
$1 million or like
right.
$500 million to make this thing, and I'm like, I have a budget of like $100, 3 cigarettes, and like a sandwich.
Right.
And I'm like,
In an afternoon.
yeah. So I'm like, it is hard sometimes to like really get things as good as you want it to, but
Uh,
yeah, it's been a battle with that.
well, I'm excited to see how you continue to, I don't know, explore that, maybe dive really deep into one, dive really deep into the other, and then
Yeah.
just like,
Something I have been more wanting to go into is like the idea of like quantum physics and queerness. I think I was talking
mhm.
about this earlier about the work I did there, but I just think for me too, like finding ways to kind of relate things to queerness and kind of thinking about how kind of queer space exists in these very alternative ways, I think has been interesting to me. Like I've been doing research too recently about queer ecology. Are you
No.
so a lot of times in our environment and biology, things just kind of don't follow this kind of Western binary thinking. And
Mhm.
something that I did a project on in my public artwork class was this idea of like estuaries. And an estuary is a site where the river meets the ocean and it becomes kind of not it becomes both saltwater and freshwater, and it kind of exists as this kind
Hmm.
of place of like queerness and this kind of place of like it's not this but it's not that but it's
Hmm.
also fully this and it's also fully that, and it's kind of like how kind of a lot of times gender and kind of these kind of sexuality kind of operates where it
Hmm.
exists as these multiple things that kind of exist.
Oh, I see the quantum physics of
Yeah,
this.
the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
idea of like
yeah.
wave particle duality of how like kind of these, when we look at photons at a very kind of very, very small scale, it exists both as a wave and it both exists as a particle. It's like it's not neither, but it is both. But it
Yes.
is also not both. It's kind of this weird kind of phenomenon.
Yes.
So just finding kind of how queerness and this kind of idea of like I think that also too for me not only relates to queerness but also to like my Chicano identity of like being both kind of
Hmm.
like Americanized but also having this kind of
Mexican root.
Mexican roots is just for me it's like how do these kind of coexist with my in myself now too is also something I've been thinking a lot about too, and about not just queerness but also identity of that, and it's finding different ways in kind of our environment or the natural world and relating that to that is something I'm really interested in my work.
Interesting. And also same with God.
Yeah.
The idea of like the Son, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, three at once,
Once
but it's like they're three different at the same time, and like
I didn't even think about how queer that is.
Yeah.
It's crazy how queer that is. We're just okay with that.
That I've heard so many jokes about that where they're just like, y'all are worshiping a three men, but it's one,
A
but it's like
throuple.
but it's like it's also not. And then like also like Mary, she has like Joseph, but that's not her child. That's not his
It's
child.
so messy.
It's a very messy thing. And yeah, but I was specifically thinking more about like the idea of like being all three at the same time, but also being neither, but being like different, and also like the idea of like the Eucharist and how it's like this is now the body of Christ, but it's also like just a wafer.
Yeah, the whole process of transubstantiation. That's a
Yes.
specific term for it. Actually, that was a working name for the sculpture for a while.
Oh, the one
Cause
that was gonna be at the Cheech.
yeah, because you know the whole idea of two of it being systematically divided into six parts is that it could be also like unfolded.
Mm-hmm.
And I was originally gonna make the work folded and unfolded, but due to like budget and time, I was only able to make the folded
Mm-hmm.
work. But for me, I could imagine this work being existed in these kind of states of the work folding itself and unfolding itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also something I want to make in the long run where I'm definitely not done with this work. This
Okay.
work is gonna
You're gonna keep exploring,
keep
keep doing
exploring.
different things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's also something I'm excited to keep exploring of how kind of this form could exist in different ways and what does it mean for this form to exist in different ways.
I'm
Yeah.
so excited to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for hopping on here and chatting with us and letting them know. Yeah, let them know where they can find you. Go
Um
support camp, put them in your shows.
on my Instagram. I'm sorry, burped. On my Instagram, it's Cam Santana. It's all just one word. No, nothing else to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then your website.
Website camsantana.com.
Slay.
And anything else I have to promote? I don't. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to me babble on.
No, I love to hear. I love hearing all the different things and all these little trauma bonding moments we had.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, if you guys enjoy this, comment down below anything that you guys have. Go check out Cam's work, put them in your show,
And
support
if you're watching this before March
16th.
16th, check out the show at the Cheech.
Go check it out. Desde Los Cielos, the Cheech in downtown Riverside. Go look at the work, experience it. Subscribe here below. Check me out on Instagram, Art Perry, my website, Perry Picasso. And yeah, talk to you later.
Bye.
Ciao. In the meantime, take care of yourself.
It
Woo!
was fun.
That was amazing.